then.
So you did not get up?
No, I
Do you
didn't.
know why?
Yes, because I didn't think I should have to get up. I had already paid my fare, and I'm sure he didn't pay any more than I did. And I didn't think that once we take a seat, even in under segregation conditions, that we should be made to stand up.
Welcome to Bite-Sized Bios. This is meant to be a mini-sode that will accompany HGTH. Every week, I will pick a person from history and dive into their lives. All right, welcome back to another episode of Bite-Sized Bios, BSB. Got number 43 coming at you today. We're going to talk about Rosa Parks, Miss Parks, and what happened before and after she chose to not give up that seat. But before we get there, of course, as is customary on this podcast, this is the mini episode accompaniment to How Did That Happen? So, of course, we have to talk about the last HGTH, the last episode. We skipped a week because of Christmas. I found that Christmas fell on a Monday, and I was just like, you know what? I'm going to give them a break from this voice, let them enjoy themselves, and come right back at it that very next Monday. So our last episode was RFK, right? His assassination. And we've been covering a lot of assassinations over the last probably few months. We've covered all the big Ks, right? Both him, his brother, Dr. King. It's as I said in the last one, I view it as one of the sadder ones of the three, because it feels like almost like what Jackie O was saying, like she knew her family was under attack, right? She knew that the world wanted to kill Kennedys. You would think that RFK would know the same thing, and maybe he just didn't care. Maybe he was just, he was like, the world needs this democracy. Y'all gonna get this justice. It did not go well for him. And so what has become customary on these mini episode accompaniments is to talk about the movies that go with this subject matter. And like I've mentioned before, I love the Kennedy. I love reading about the Kennedys. I like just finding out all the different conspiracies about them. But I have not seen many of the movies that surround the Kennedys. Specifically, I haven't seen Jackie, which I'm going to mention to you guys. I believe that's Natalie Portman is in that. It's a movie called Killing Kennedy. I want to check out Bobby Kennedy for President, 13 Days, and a movie called Missiles. There's Missiles. However you feel like pronouncing it right now, that's what that is. I have not seen any of those, and they are all on my list. And if we were to recap the last episode, I anything that the important parts is that, of course, our man RFK is in California for the presidential primary, wins California and I think South Dakota. And while he's trying to move to the next press conference, because as we stated, this man just can't get enough of the press, he gets gunned down by a man named Sirhan, which if you listen to the last episode, we weren't sure if it's Sirhan, just one maybe, but it's Sirhan, in my opinion. We found out about him. He's still alive, still getting denied parole by Gavin Newsom every couple years. And yet another similarity that comes with these assassinations is that basically none of the children or family involved in either MLK, JFK, RFK's murder believe the people that were put in jail for it actually did it. None of them believe that. Dr. King's family does not believe that James Earl Ray actually killed their father, or whatever relationship he is to them. You know what I mean? Even RFK didn't believe that Lee Harvey Oswald killed JFK. The moment it happened, he didn't believe that it happened. He literally thought the CIA had already done it. RFK Jr., the man who's running for president right now, who you can barely understand what he's saying, he doesn't believe that his father was killed by Sirhan. So it's just weird that we have this kinship, these similarities between all these families that are just like, you know what? We know that this didn't happen. We know beyond a shadow of a doubt, more than likely, that the government was involved. And I'll tell you, I was talking to my mom the other day, and we were talking about conspiracies, right? And we were talking about 9/11, because I was telling her my thoughts. And I've never talked about it on this podcast, but I believe to a degree that it was an inside job. I think that 9/11 was orchestrated by America for a reason that I don't have handy. But that's what I think. And it's more from, you can look at things and you can read stuff and be influenced by different people's opinions. I'm influenced by my eyes. I'm influenced by watching those buildings go down and what little I know about science and physics. It just doesn't seem that would be the way the cookie would crumble. right? I say that to say we were talking about conspiracies, and my mom was like, "You believe that? You know, you believe that 9/11 wasn't real? You know?" I mean, looking at me like I'm telling her that the sky is green, you know. But and then I switch it on her. I say, "Well, do you think that JFK was murdered by the government?" And both my dad's there too. Both of them are kind of just like pausing, like, maybe he did. Maybe he was killed by this. Okay, and so if we could argue and possibly even prove that the government took out a sitting president, what would stop them from knocking over a couple buildings? The question I posed to her, right? When you look at it that way, because I think on the outside, or if you look at it from any other perspective, you're like, there's no way 9/11 was an inside job. There's no way the government chose to do that. But you think about all the stuff they got from it, right? You think about where we were at as a society, as a country. The war machine had slowed down. The war machine had slowed down. As someone who grew up during that time, before and after, I can clearly remember when the movies that you're watching, that the bad guys used to be like Eastern European dudes, right? A lot of leather jackets and bowl cuts, right? A lot of dudes from like Serbia or whatever, right? Then after 9/11, everything switches to Muslims. Everything is hijabs and all this stuff, and like the bad guys are now Muslim people. My point being, before 9/11, at this time in America, in geopolitics, if you will, we didn't really have an enemy. We had people that didn't like us. China was still China, you know, North Korea was still North Korea. You know, the Middle East was not our friend, right? But we didn't have a full-on focused enemy. And once we did 9/11, look who we got now, right? Look who we can focus our hate on. Look who we can have as our target when we're making these billion-dollar bombs, right? Because if you don't have a reason to build the billion-dollar bombs, you probably don't build them. And the people that build them don't get the $1 billion. So they got to find a reason for, you to need the bombs. So I just say, I don't know, it blew my mind that people could make a connection to one thing and not the other. Because I do believe that JFK was killed by the CIA. And like I said in the last episode, as you find with all of these assassinations, there's always some random CIA guys just hanging out, just on the prowl, just randomly where they shouldn't be. And I don't think it's a coincidence. But yeah, I don't know if there's much else to say about the last episode specifically. The biggest thing that I found the most entertaining and interesting was that Saran was so small that he made a living as a jockey. Now, you'd have to know how small horse jockeys are to think about it. And then when you talk about trying to understand where he was in relation to the senator when he was pulling the trigger, he was standing on a pile of meal trays because he's so small. Like, it gets left out. Like I said, I left you, I spared you guys the trajectory BS and all the little reblockings of how this assassination could have happened. It's not that interesting. It's on YouTube. Find it. It's not that interesting. But what is interesting is that this man was so small that he had to have a step stool to commit an assassination. That's hilarious. But yeah, we're going to talk about Rosa Parks today. We're going to get into that. I'll be honest with you guys. I had some trouble with myself trying to figure out how to make this a palatable episode, not specifically because of her or whatever she is. I'm trying to find the through line to make it interesting for you guys, to make it worth listening. Because, I mean, we all know the bullet points. Alabama, middle-aged older black woman. She's tired, doesn't want to get up. White guy's like, get up. She doesn't. So on and so forth with the history. You guys know that, right? I know that. We know that. And I'm trying to find the things that people don't know to make this worth, to make it worth it at all. So we'll see if that gets done. As always, find us wherever you find podcasts. HTT Happen for all the socials. HTT Happen 22 for TikTok. HTThappen.com is the website with all of the extras. What I've been doing recently, guys, is I've been working on a book. I don't think I've mentioned it here on the podcast, but I've been working on a book for the last couple of years, about the last year and a half or so, not about my life, but about the situation that I'd gone through in the last year and a half or so. It's about the breakups that I dealt with and trying to understand how to move forward. Basically, I had gone through a very, very tumultuous breakup, and when I found myself trying to find literature that spoke to my plight, right, and my issues, I couldn't find one as a black male in America. I'm not saying they're not out there. I'm just saying I couldn't find it. So I wanted to try to make something for people. Because what I found was the people who were writing about the breakups didn't look like me, and I couldn't always apply their advice or understand their where they're coming from. So this is kind of like that. And I say that to say there's excerpts now on the website from different parts of chapters that I've already written. And they're pretty good, and they'll keep popping up as we go on until the book gets published. I don't know when that'll be. I don't even know when it'll be finished. We have at least another year probably of living before we can even get to that. But it'll be up there, httapp.com. As I always say, give us 5 stars if you love the podcast, 2 stars if you didn't love it. Tell us why you didn't love it, because constructive criticism is always welcome. We do appreciate it. We're coming up on the end of year 2 for the podcast. It's crazy. I was talking to somebody about it today. I mean, we're talking 2 full years. I would have never seen it, even as someone who loves podcasting and knew that I wanted to start a podcast. The fact that I could start a podcast and maintain it for 2 years blows me away. And can't wait to see what comes in the years that are ahead. But I think that's about it of me rambling. You guys always know I do a little too much talking this part. So without further ado, as we're going to do, here is the episode.
About the 3rd stop from where I boarded the bus, there were some white people got on, and they took all the front seats and left one man standing. And when the driver saw this man standing up,
white man.
Yes, he was white.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't. The passenger didn't ask for the seat at all. Or didn't say anything, but just found a place to stand. The driver noticed him standing, and that is when he told the 4 of us to let him have those seats.
So we're here today to talk about Rosa Parks. Rosa. Fun name to say. Rosa. Right, we're going to find out all about her life before and after that fateful day where she chose to stay seated. Rosa Parks was born Rosa Louise Macaulay in Tuskegee, Alabama on February the 4th, 1913, to a teacher named Leona and a carpenter named James. In addition to being of African ancestry, part of her ancestry includes Scots-Irish as well as Native Americans. As a child, she suffered from chronic tonsillitis and was often bedridden. Family could not afford to pay for the operation to address the condition, so homegirl just kept suffering. When her parents separated, she moved in with her mother, she moved into her grandparents' house with her mother, right outside Pine Level, where her younger brother Sylvester was born. She completed her education at Pine Level around 11, and she enrolled in the Montgomery Industrial School for Girls. They could have picked a way better name. I don't want any school that I go to be called industrial. What does that even mean? I mean, I know what it means, but what does that mean in relation to school? I've been to a bunch of schools. None of them have been called industrial. After finishing at this industrial school, she went to Alabama State Teachers College, Alabama State Teachers College High School. What is going on here? What is with the names? However, she was unable to graduate because of her illness. Like I said, homegirl stayed sick with that tonsillitis. Parents were too broke to get it fixed. She just had throat problems. So throughout her early life, she became a member of the African Methodist Episcopal Church, AME. I will say that I think that was actually the church that I was born into. I was born into an African Methodist church, but my family doesn't practice that anymore. My mom is a Presbyterian, I think. Don't get me to lying. But I recognize that was definitely my childhood a little bit. And of course, the AME is a century-old independent black denomination that was founded by free blacks in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So when she finally graduated, when she finally got those throat problems together, right? She got out of high school. She graduated in 1934. She married a man named Raymond Parks. Looks to be a couple years before she graduated. Wow. I mean, so he was born in Alabama, just like she was, Randolph County, 1903. And he was a self-educated man with the help of his mother, Jerry Parks. It could be Gary, but it's Geri. So I'm assuming that's Jerry. Pretty cool name, Jerry Parks. He was an immaculate dresser, and he had a thorough knowledge of domestic affairs and current events, which made most of people think that he was college educated. He supported and encouraged Rosa's desire to complete her formal education. I'm sure this was a big turn on for her. And Mr. Parks was an early activist in the effort to free the Scottsboro Boys, a celebrated case in the 1930s. And I'm not going to sit here and act like I know what these Scottsboro Boys are, so I'm going to look them up real fast for you and me. Scottsboro Boys. There were 9 African-American male teenagers that were accused in Alabama of raping 2 white women in 1931. There's a picture of them. None of them looked that happy. Yikes.
Washington, D.C., the Scottsboro case. Throughout the world goes the news of the most important United States Supreme Court decision in years. The order for a retrial of the 7 Negro youths recently tried on charges of assault and condemned to death by an Alabama court. Like the Sacco, Vanzetti, and Mooney cases, the Scottsboro trial has attracted worldwide attention. Radicals contending that the Negro youths were railroaded through Alabama courts.
outcome of the Scottsboro Boys. It's fun to say, Scottsboro Boys. Oh, so sad. Wow. So they were ultimately saved from execution, but they languished in prison for years. And I read on Wikipedia that one of the girls who accused them has since recanted her statement and was like, I'm sorry I put those boys through all that. All that. But yeah, so he was, Rosa Parks' beau was instrumental in trying to, I guess, free these guys. But so together, the two of them, Raymond and Rosa, we're back on the Rosa Parks track, hang with me, they started to work for the NAACP, which of course is the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. He was an active member, and she served as secretary and later youth leader of the local branch. At the time of her arrest, she was preparing for a major youth conference. Now, this is something that I don't think I knew fully, really, until not like in the last couple years, I want to say. Before that, before I would say about 3 years ago, I did not realize that she already had a connection with the NAACP, that she herself was already, quote unquote, an activist. I would say, I don't think being a part of the NAACP makes you an activist now, but I think in the 50s and before it did, because you're creating and working in a society, or excuse me, you're making a group that is specifically for the advancement of a race of people that the government is actively oppressing, right? So it's not like it's not the National Association for the Advancement of White People, which sounds like it would be a fun time, you know what I mean, which would have been fine during that time. No, it's the colored people. So it's like, to me, at that point, to even choose, like, I'm not even sure if I would at that time. I don't know. I often wonder about myself and how I would be during the 50s and 60s, during the Civil Rights Movement, or even Jim Crow, Reconstruction, because it's easy to, well, not easy. It's not easy. It's easier to be a black person now than it was then. Hands down, 100% true. Any black person that was alive then and alive now can tell you it is, right? Things are still, we got a long way to go, but it's better now. So I couldn't imagine living in a world that they created for me. I couldn't imagine living in that world. I don't know. Like I said, my parents were born in the 50s, so they have vivid memories of all of this. My parents can tell you when they remember when schools were integrated, right? When they went to school with white kids, they remember the differences, and there was, in being that they were from different parts of the same state. It's interesting to note when it happened. I don't want to get it wrong, but I want to say my mother didn't go to school with white kids until she was in high school, literally 14 years old, before she ever went to the same school with, you know what I mean? She's that level of life. My dad, I think it was elementary school, same state, mind you, Virginia. And that's, if you look at segregation, I think we might have covered this. I'm not sure. I know I've done the research on this before. But there was a big problem with segregation. I know I'm going on a tangent. I'm gonna bring it back to Rosa Parks in a second, guys. Just hang with me. There was a big problem when they basically enforced the Linda v. Board. Linda v. Board? No, Brown v. Board. Excuse me. I think her name was Linda Brown. Brown v. Board, that said basically you have to now, separate but equal is not cool, right? We have to integrate these schools. You would think that would actually just happen, right? Didn't happen. Across the board, it really didn't happen. And what ended up happening is the president, I think even Nixon, had to end up enforcing it and saying, we're not going to give you federal funding unless you actually create these integrated schools. I say that to say about my point of my parents, same state, 7 years difference of when they actually got integrated, right? But go back to Rosa Parks, right? So she was in the NAACP, active member, before even she ever decided not to get up out of her seat. And evidently even her being the secretary of the NAACP itself was very forward. Like she's been quoted as saying, I was the only woman there and they needed a secretary and I was too timid to say no, end quote. So that's, I mean, she kind of just, was going places that women were not normally seen. So like I said, she was very instrumental in a lot of things up until this point, up until the point of the actual bus incident in the 40s. She had dealt with a lot of different civil rights and equal justice things. She created this thing called the Committee for Equal Justice, which happened after the gang rape of Reese Taylor, who was a black woman from Abbeville, Alabama. She continued to work on anti-rape, or as an anti-rape activist for years. And Parks and her husband were even members of the League of Women Voters. And you have to remember, even this now, I mean, voting for women, even at this point, is still relatively new. It's not super new, but it's like your grandmother probably didn't do it. So that's like, imagine that. Imagine thinking of something that's new and being like, oh, is it? But it's like, what? But did your grandmother do it? It's pretty new. And so now we're going to get to the actual the bus incident. right? In order to do that, you got to talk a little bit about Montgomery in the early 20th century. So in 1900, Montgomery had passed a city ordinance to segregate bus passengers by race, right? Conductors were empowered to assign seats to achieve that goal. They gave the power to the dude whipping the bus. According to the law, no passenger would be required to move or give up their seat and stand if the bus was crowded and no other seats were available. They just weren't doing that. Over time, of course, because time dictates things more than the actual, laws in certain cases we see with a lot of things, Montgomery bus drivers had adopted the practice of requiring black riders to move when there were no white-only seats left. So what we find here is they made the law in 1900, right? In 1900, of course, as we know, is towards the end. It is the pivotal change in America from Reconstruction to Jim Crow. I mean, not specifically that date, that year, but it was, we've left now Reconstruction. We are no longer trying to rebuild the war, or excuse me, we're no longer trying to rebuild the country after the Civil War. We've given up on that because it was a lost cause. Now we're getting into Jim Crow. Now we're getting into how these societies are starting to enact some of these laws on the still relatively newly freed blacks. When you think about it, it's wild to say that, but in the year 1900, black people in America had only been free citizens for 35 years. 123 years ago. And it's even wild when you add that up. Add all of that up. When you say African Americans in this country, that has lasted for what? 300-400 years? Have only been free members of society. What is that? 158 years? We'll just leave that right there and get back to Montgomery in the early 20th century. So we start here with segregating the buses and leaving it up to the bus driver, right? And then the idea is that no one's gonna have to get up. We don't, no one, if it's crowded, you just stand. It's like that, whatever, right? But as time goes on, as Jim Crow continues to intensify, you get the white privilege of getting whatever seat is you really want on the bus. It's now not up to just the fact that we're segregated. It's, well, this white man doesn't want to stand and you're sitting, so now you have to get up. That's how we, over the 30 to 40 years after this law is enacted, you get this. And so the first 4 rows of seats on an average Montgomery bus were reserved for white people, right? The buses had colored sections for black people that were generally in the rear of the bus, although blacks composed more than 75% of the ridership, which is why, like you say, the first 4 really were like the white seats. Anything after that's usually for blacks, but don't let there be a big day with white ridership. Every black dude in that place is getting up, So the sections were not fixed, but determined by placement of a movable sign. Black people could sit in the middle rows until the white section filled. As I said, basically as more white people get on, black people go further and further to the back. Black people could not sit across the aisle and were in the same row as a white person, so things would start to get dicey. The driver could move the colored section sign or remove it altogether whenever he wanted. Basically, y'all don't even exist right now. If white people were already sitting in the front, black people had to board at the front, had to board at the front to pay the fare, then disembark and re-enter through the rear door. Let me read that for you one more time. If white people were already sitting in the front of this bus, a black person would have to board the bus as a normal person, pay the fare, get out of the bus from the front, go all the way around to the back, and get in only because a white person was already sitting in the front. That is madness. Clinical insanity. So for years, the black community had complained that the situation was unfair. Parks said, and I quote, my resisting being mistreated on the bus did not begin with that particular arrest. I did a lot of walking in Montgomery, end quote. Now this story here might illustrate, like as she just said in her previous quote, she's already had some issues with the Montgomery bus system. So one day in 1943, right, Parks boarded a bus, paid the fare, as I just said, already a white guy there, right? So she has to leave, just to follow the city rules and get out and walk around to the back. When she does so, I guess because she had angered the bus driver in some way, because she didn't want to initially do it when he said jump. She didn't say how high. When she gets out of the bus, she's already paid her fare. He just drives off. Guy just drives off. It's ridiculous. All right, so what really happened? Right, so after working all day, Parks boarded the Cleveland Avenue bus, a General Motors old look bus that belonged to the Montgomery City Lines, around 6 p.m. Thursday, December the 1st, 1955.
I left work on my way home December 1st, 1955, about 6 o'clock in the afternoon. I boarded the bus downtown in Montgomery on Coates Square. As
the bus proceeded out of town. On the third stop, the white passengers had filled the front of the bus. When I got on the bus, the rear was filled with colored passengers, and they were beginning to stand. The seat I occupied was the first of the seats where the Negro passengers take as they on this route.
She paid her fare, sat in an empty seat in the first row of back seats they were reserved for blacks in the colored section, and near the middle of the bus, her row was directly behind the 10 seats reserved for white passengers.
The driver noted that the front of the bus was filled with white passengers, and there would be 2 or 3 men standing. He looked back and asked that the seat where I had taken, along with 3 other persons, one in the seat with me and 2 across the aisle, was seated. He demanded the seats that we were occupying. The other passengers very reluctantly gave up their seats, but I refused to do so. He then called the officers of the law. They came and placed me under arrest, and I was bailed out shortly after the arrest.
And what's crazy, and I didn't realize this until reading this. Remember the story I just told you about how she had hopped off the bus and the guy drove off without her, right? Same bus driver who was driving on that fateful day. Same dude. We're talking 12 years later. And I think she said she was so tired from the day she didn't realize it, because she had said after that day on 19th, imagine you pay your fare, you get off to follow the rules, which are already archaic, right? You follow the rules, and they still won't work with you. Oh, I would be. I mean, livid doesn't even begin to describe the feelings that would be flowing through my veins. But so she realizes too late that she's on the bus with a guy she said she'd never ride with, but now they're there. Oh, did I mention it was in the rain? The 1943 was in the rain. It's so sad. So what he does, Mr. Blake, the bus driver, he moves the colored-only section. As we said, they were free to do that under the city's laws, and demanded that 4 black people give up their seats in the middle section so that the white passengers could sit. Years later, when Rosa Parks was recalling the situation, she was quoted as saying, "When that driver stepped back towards us, when he waved his hand and ordered us up and out of our seats, I felt a determination cover my body like a quilt on a winter night." End quote. 3 people got up, did what he asked, except for her. She wouldn't budge. She moved, actually, I'd stand corrected, she moved, but towards the window seat. This is not what Mr. Blake wanted. She once again was quoted as saying, I thought of Emmett Till, a 14-year-old African-American who was lynched in Mississippi that same year after being accused of offending a white woman in her family's grocery store. Those killers were tried and acquitted. I just couldn't go back, she says. Couldn't go backwards. We were trying to make this progress forward. And so Mr. Blake says, why don't you stand up? Parks responds, I don't think I should have to stand up. And so Blake called the police. And that's where you get the infamous mugshot of Rosa Parks, with a little card up there with a little inmate number.
I want to make very certain that it is understood that I had not taken a seat in the white section, as has been reported in many cases. The seat where I occupied, we were in the custom of taking this seat on the way home, even though at times on this same bus route, we occupied the same seat with white standing if their space had been taken up, the seats had been taken up.
She was actually charged initially with the violation of Chapter 6, Section 11 of the segregation law of the Montgomery City Code. But yeah, and that led to the Montgomery bus boycott, which of course was instrumental in promoting who we've already talked about, MLK. It's funny how all this stuff goes together. Is because if you know, I don't know if it's 55, but it's right around that same time. I think it was 54 actually. Was the year he had moved to Alabama after finishing all of his college. If you listen to the podcast, man went to 3 different states for 3 different degrees, got them all. Then he started at a church in Alabama. And once he heard about this, he kind of orchestrated not the entire boycott, but kind of became one of the instrumental figures to use it as a platform. And of course, after her arrest, and all this goes down in the 60s, she's a icon, a civil rights icon. I didn't realize she moved to Hampton, Virginia. I'm from Virginia Beach, Virginia, so I'm from it's Hampton Roads. I didn't realize that in 57, after all of this, she moved to Hampton, Virginia because she was unable to find work in Alabama. And she actually ended up working as a hostess at an inn at Hampton University. And like I said, I mean, she would go on to become an icon, definitely a civil rights icon, an icon of America. She would live until I think 2005. Lost her husband in 1977 to throat cancer, I want to say. Lost her brother the same year. So I think 1977 was a tough year for her, but she created foundations, to help children. She was given the Presidential Medal of Freedom, I think in 1996, 97 by President Clinton. And now let me preface what I'm about to say with, I think she's a great woman, and I think that she did wondrous things for our society. Now I'll say what I'm going to say. What is the point of the Presidential Medal of Freedom? Now, you know what I mean? Then hear me out. Like, the Medal of Honor I get. The Medal of Honor makes so much sense, right? The Pulitzer Prize, it makes sense, right? The Nobel Peace Prize also makes sense. But who cares about, because what do you do with that? Do you put that on your resume? Does that somehow elevate you in life? The Presidential Medal of Freedom? I don't know. I would rather have a Medal of Honor. I'm never going to have one. But, like, that to me, that's a dope prize to get. Like, your country was like, yo, you're like one of the baddest dudes out there, bro. And, like, this is for you. What's messed up, not messed up, but what kind of sucks is the posthumous ones. Because, like, the dudes that went out just not knowing they ever got it, which I guess is the whole point. I don't know. That's probably why I don't have one, because I'm just waiting to be given one. But, yeah, so she did a lot. Did quite a bit. Died in 2005. She was the first woman to lie in state at the Rotunda. I believe now RBG also had that honor. I think so. We're not even going to fact check that. We're just going to say your boy's right. But yeah, I mean, so that was Rosa Parks. Right, Rosa Parks. Great person. I learned a lot about her. Like I said, the big thing to me, I didn't know. It was interesting to hear about how the bus structure worked. Because I've never really ridden that many buses. I've ridden a couple Greyhounds, but I've never really done like public transportation specifically, like that. I've ridden a bus once, but so I know how they work. I don't understand how the modern ones work, but the idea of how a 1950s era racially segregated bus could work is it's a crazy idea. Like we talk about, when she was put out on the bus, or when she was following the rules in 1943 with the same guy who would actually get her arrested, Mr. Blake. She was left in the rain. It's just, I don't know. It's that this was the way our world was working is wild to me. It's hard to comprehend. And like I was watching something that said, I think it was Maya Angelou that said, if she had gotten up that day, who knows? If it had been somebody else at some point, but we'd be living in a different world. She was found guilty of her charge of not getting up. And of course we continue to progress. And with that comes the bus boycott that then leads to things, and we get the Voting Rights Act, and then the next decade we get the Civil Rights, bill that gets pushed through by LBJ. Things move forward, right? But you need those catalysts. You need the people who push the needle, and she was. And so you have to give her props for that, because like I said, talking about for me, like if I was to go back, I don't know. I would like they said, 3 people got up. Dudes got up. Like I think it was like 3 dudes and her. All of them got up. And she was like, I'm not doing that. Nah, G. Not today. I'm tired. And it was December. It was probably cold. Probably not. It was December 1st. But weather was different back then. She was like, I'm not doing it. And I think that with the specific thing that she was said to have said when he asked her, like, she was like, I don't think I should have to get up. Not even like saying no. It's just like literally like this, this is wrong. And there's no real reason that I should have to get up, which is such a real thing, such a real response to have. I don't think I should have to get up. It's such a thing that you would say when you're fed up that you don't even maybe don't even know what you're gonna say. Your brain is just speaking for you. It's like, no, I'm not doing that. But yeah, so great person. Hope it was a good episode. Hope you guys learned something. Give us 5 stars wherever you find this. 2 stars if you didn't like it too much. Tell us why, because constructive criticism is always welcome. HTTadmin.com for everything, all the extras. Like I said, you'll find the excerpts from the new book that'll be coming out probably next year, probably more like 2025. Working titles I have. I don't think it's point to put them out, but I would say just check them out if you were. I don't know if you're into like nonfiction literature. I'm trying not to make it self-help at all. Not all, but not in the vein of how it normally is. I'm trying to just. I feel like truthfully, and that could be benefit could be had from just reading about what happened to me. That's what I think. That may be a vain, maybe a biased way of looking at it, but I don't know. I feel like just to know that, for people to know they're not alone is the point of that. Not that it's supposed to be something greater to be marveled at. It's just to know that there are people out there, because I find solace in knowing that there's people out there who are facing the same issues that I am. So yeah, I would definitely check that out. Like I said, at HTT Happens, all the socials. HTT Happens 22 for the TikTok. And yeah, I don't think there's much else to get into before we get out of here. So thank you guys for pressing play, and we'll see you next week with the next How Did That Happen? Oh, and one more thing. I wanted to play you guys out with just kind of a where are they now with the Scottsboro boys, because it's in some parts it's good, in some parts it's sad. It's a very sad story that we kind of glossed over in the podcast. These guys were basically accused of assaulting these two white women. It turns out they actually, of course, they didn't do it, and it ended up changing the idea of how juries are structured throughout America based on the Supreme Court decision. But what I'm going to play for you now is just kind of what happened to them after they were released from prison.
Willie Roberson, pardoned July 24, 1937, after serving 6 years in prison, sought and achieved complete anonymity. Eugene Williams, pardoned July 24, 1937, after serving 6 years in prison, successfully established a new identity and disappeared from the public eye. Olin Montgomery, pardoned July 24, 1937, after serving 6 years in prison, repeatedly arrested drunk and disorderly, settled in Georgia, 1944. Leroy Wright, pardoned July 24, 1937, after serving 6 years in prison. Excellent adjustment. Then murdered his wife and committed suicide, September 1959. Charlie Weems, paroled November 7, 1943, served 12 years in prison, dropped quickly into obscurity. Clarence Norris, paroled December 1946, served 15 years in prison, changed identity, and disappeared. Ozzie Powell, paroled December 1946, served 15 years in prison, chronically unemployed because of identification with Scottsboro, changed name, and disappeared. Haywood Patterson, escaped July 1948, served 17 years. Convicted of manslaughter in Detroit, Michigan, 1951. Died of cancer, Michigan State Prison, August 24, 1952. Andy Wright, paroled June 9, 1950. Served 19 years in prison, July 11, 1951, charged with raping a 13-year-old Albany, New York girl. Charge proved false, changed identity, and disappeared.